So as he says, I'm an architect and planner, urban planner. So I decided to retire a month ago because it makes to have more time for myself and to dedicate more time to the things I like more, than is teaching or writing. So now I'm working within the Union of Writers and Artists. There is a commission within the Union of Writers and Artists. It's City Culture Architecture, CCA. So I'm more dedicated now to work with the CCA than I used to be with the group of the comprehensive development of the city. That is a place you visited a moment ago. And lately I'm more dedicated to lecture, to advise, consult, and to be asked about many things that are going on in Cuba today, because everything is changing so fast that sometimes you make a PowerPoint on Monday, you need to correct it on Tuesday because things have changed and the like. So I would prefer you to ask me. I don't know, you may have a lot of questions about what's going on in Cuba, what's going to happen, what happened before, why this or why that, I don't know. So there are many questions today, I know, what's going to happen.
I guess maybe a good starting general question.
Yeah.
We've just come from the model of the city, and we've got that historical sense and different ideas that were implemented, planning ideas. In your long career, can you just give us a little capsule statement about how you've seen things change and the trends that are current?
Well, the model is a good place to start trying understanding the city, because as you saw, the model, the scale model of Havana is color coded. So you saw in the model that the prevailing color is yellow. So when you look at the model, you see that the scale model of Havana is yellow. This means that the model is basically, or Havana is basically a city built between 1900 and 1958. So this is a result of 6 years of a very dynamic process. The city was moving very fast. So the city came from east to west from the bay, gradually moving to the west, but always growing by addition and not by substitution. So the landscape in Havana has not been changed in the last 50 years. So visiting Havana is like being in a kind of time capsule, because the model speaks, and the model tells you that 80% of the city is previous to the revolution. If you bear in mind that the revolution is more than 50 years, this means that at least 80% of the city is 50 years or more. So the fact is that the average age of the housing stock in Havana today is 75 years. But you have a very old city, or a city aging very fast at the same time. And then you have phenomena that you don't have in other cities. In other places, the big problem is ownership, housing ownership, affordable housing. In Havana is the opposite. In Havana, 90% of the housing stock is private. So it's privately owned. So the question in Havana is not to be the owner of the house, it's how to maintain what you own. This is a big question here. So a brief story is, in 1959, immediately after the revolution, rents were reduced by 50%. That's a very good news, 50% less. And a year after, the government voted a new law, what they call it the urban reform. The urban reform put an end to the housing as a business. So since that moment, housing was supposed to be a basic need, and the people should have the possibility to have access to housing. So the idea was to nationalize all the urban property dedicated to business, to be transferred to the people who were living in those places, apartments or houses. So the idea was to turn the rent that people were paying before into an installment to the bank. So if you were paying $100, then the first benefit was to pay 50%, 50. And then that money became an installment to pay the bank, to pay for the value, for the construction value of the house, and not for the market price. So this means that it was not so difficult for many people to be able to buy the house in which they were living. Then another factor is that houses were not expensive because many of them were old. course. So the asset of the house was calculated depending on the years of construction, the condition of the house, the location, and the like. And that allowed people to be the owners of the house, to have 20 years to pay, no interest in the middle. So it became very easy to become the owner, and that is why statistics show that 90% of the present housing stock is privately owned. That was a good idea. The bad idea was maybe to centralize all the maintenance of the housing stock. That the idea was very idealistic, and it was to have one entity caring of the maintenance of all the houses at affordable prices. But of course, everybody addressed the same institutions, and suddenly one institution was invaded by requests for housing, for repairs or remodeling or whatever. So it was almost impossible. And that institution precisely centralized the building materials. So there was no other way but that institution to go ahead with the restoration and the preservation of the housing stock. That caused an accumulation of pending jobs. So the number of pending jobs started growing, and then people saw that the small crack became larger and larger, and people started being concerned about that and looking for alternatives. And the alternatives were the black market. So then the black market appears, offering building materials and services, but at different prices, not affordable for the majority. Then the majority was practically excluded, being there formally an institution in charge for that. The institution was not really working, not giving an appropriate answer. So then the accumulated number of pending jobs grew up. And in the 1970s, a new approach was tested, and it was what we call the micro brigade. The micro brigade is a name taken from a small group of people. There's about 30 workers who decide to apply for this self-help construction movement. So if you applied, you were able to be fully paid during the time you spent on the construction site building your own apartment. So that was very beneficial for people, because think about being paid for building your own apartment. And even having other benefits like a reduction in the final price and the like. That worked for a while, but it became very expensive. And the quality, of course, when you have amateurs, people, non-professionals building, of course the quality will suffer immediately. So the quality of these apartments suffer a lot. Besides this, there was a very, let's say, very vertical and very impositive way of doing things. The neighborhoods in which the movement worked were very poor projects, repeating the same building again. If you go to the east of the city, you can see one of them in the periphery for good. The bad things are in the periphery, not in the city. And this is one of the many examples of the neighborhoods created after the big movement of self-help construction. So these neighborhoods, although they provided housing to thousands of people, they were not the place people were looking for. So they became rejected by the society as dull places, boring places, ugly places, without an incomplete infrastructure. So many of these new neighborhoods were more houses. All the effort was focused on housing, and then the infrastructure was neglected. So many services were lacking there. If you visit Alamar, at the east of the city, Alamar is 100,000 people. There's only one movie house, for example. So there are no restaurants or cafeterias, no shops, no nothing.